22nd of May, 2001. Police in Clearfield, Utah are called to the scene of a horrific sexual assault.
I don't think you could script a more diabolical, sinister, heinous act of crime perpetrated against humanity and individuals in a family than what our suspect did.
Using DNA from the crime scene, police matched the suspect to another sexual assault the previous July.
We know who the suspect is by DNA. We just couldn't put the DNA to the man.
You know, you wish you could solve them immediately, like they do on CSI. You know, in an hour it's done. This is one of those cases that didn't work that way.
What unfolds next is shocking beyond belief.
I don't know if anyone actually knows exactly how many victims there are, but at the very least they had 10 cases with 11 victims.
Sadistic. That guy has no conscience whatsoever. He's a true animal.
Police never give up hope, but fearing they may never capture the man responsible, they turn to a new science for help.
We were only fishing for results and getting nothing. But in 2015, with the advances in DNA technology, we could begin to actively hunt him.
This is the story of how police over a 17-year period and with the help of familial DNA were able to track down and capture a serial rapist responsible for destroying countless lives.
It was the only thing that led us to this man.
Now we've got the science catching up with the evidence. We need to pursue this. No, we were hopeful.
May 22nd, 2001. Clearfield police in Utah receive an urgent 911 call from a family in the area.
The victim was actually in bed with her husband at the time. The suspect ordered her to wake up her husband and bind him. She did that, and the suspect asked if there was anybody else in the house. The victim said, "My daughter is in the house," and I believe the victim's brother was in the house.
He went throughout the home gathering up all of the occupants. The entire family, one by one, and tying them up as well.
Then the suspect proceeded to rape one of the victims while forcing the other victims to watch. And then he proceeded to sexually assault the other victim as well. He mostly sexually assaulted the daughter.
The uncle told me that while he was raping the victims, the suspect had brushed up against him and that he thought he was next to be raped. I couldn't imagine the horror that went on in that room.
As you get into the facts and delve into what happened to these people and what he perpetrated against them, it is probably as diabolical of a crime as you can possibly imagine.
Near the end of the event, the door opened and the son of the original victim came in through the door home from work.
He immediately had a gun put in his forehead, and he was bound and gagged as well.
The son had to be restrained and then had to sit and watch the suspect finish the perpetration of crimes against the rest of his family members, his mother and his sister.
Before the intruder fled the scene, he would make one last demand.
After he commits as graphic of an act of criminality as you possibly can, the suspect then incredibly wanted money from the family. There was, uncle had $100. The suspect at gunpoint made one of our victims retrieve the $100 and give it to him.
Kind of a strange way that he left that attack. He actually kissed one of the victims on the mouth and said goodbye and walked out the door like he was a boyfriend.
Police arrive at the home and straight away begin a forensic examination of the scene.
It's kind of a remarkable role that law enforcement has to play when they arrive on a scene like this. Again, to basically keep their checklist, keep their training intact while they are dealing with their own emotions because of what they're seeing and processing from the emotions emanating from the victims who have just been subject to this attack.
When they arrived, they tried to cast a net. They scoured the area, went to neighbors, looking for, again, anybody who could have seen somebody coming or leaving, footprints, anybody who might have heard anything.
We took everything from the house. There was boxes and boxes of evidence. We took the bedding, we took the ties that he used to tie up the victims. We took just about everything. There's pictures of everything. We had all kinds of evidence in the case.
They would have taken both the victims in for sex crimes kits and collected DNA. I know the suspect would lick parts of the bodies of the victims, whether it would be through oral sex or licking a breast or a cheek or whatever. They would take swabs to collect DNA in that manner.
Rape kits are an invasive procedure. The very fact that they were assaulted by this person physically, and then they're subject to an examination to collect evidence to try to seek justice. Sometimes they feel violated and invaded again, but in this case, biological evidence was collected, including DNA of the suspect at that time.
It was absolutely necessary to get. They were very brave to cooperate and to go through all of these steps in an attempt to find their attacker.
The son was able to give a sketchy description of the perpetrator.
He did catch a glimpse of him, but it was a very fast glimpse, and of course he had a gun put in his face real quick, so he wasn't really focused on the suspect at that time. He was focused on the barrel of the gun.
Still, a rendering was done based upon the information he provided that did lead to a suspect composition drawing being done that actually then ended up in a newspaper article as well here in our area.
Some of the leads that they were following up on based on the sketch, they would have immediately taken the DNA from those suspects. And these are very loose suspects. Somebody calls in and says, that sketch looks like it might be, so-and-so. None of that led to anything. It was a complete dead end.
The family were law-abiding and well-regarded in the Clearfield area.
This was a family living their lives, going about their business, minding their business, helping one another, productive in the community, liked in their neighborhood. And so this was your ultimate victim in the sense of basically an innocent, naive, law-abiding family. Part of the problem that they faced and they're associating with as they try to make individual choices and decisions about therapy, counseling, what they're going to do, are they going to seek it? They may feel like they don't need it now for a while, and 6 months, 6 years later, they see something on the news that reminds them of what happened to them. So it's basically, it's a process, not an event, but they all have to go through now life experiencing and dealing with that the best they can.
I don't know how any of them still function today, and they're great people.
Clearfield police were quick to expand their search to beyond the locality.
Law enforcement did begin to wonder if they had a serial rapist here, so they were kind of focusing a little bit in that direction.
We didn't know if it was a local suspect or somebody from out of town. And we did everything we could with everybody that we knew locally, but none of them turned out.
There was a local focus as well as an acknowledgement and a possibility that it might be somebody that comes and visits this area, that doesn't necessarily live here, that has business here, that has associates here. And so you have to keep, I guess, your eye on the ball going both directions.
We don't believe that any of the victims were targeted. He picked a home that had 3 grown males living inside of it who were all home. It would be an incredibly unlikely target. But for someone who is just brazenly walking along townhomes, just trying to jiggle that door open, that seems to have been his MO.
May 22, 2001, police in Clearfield, Utah are investigating the savage attack on a family in the area.
The suspect ended up blinding all of them. And then he raped the mother and the daughter in front of the entire family.
After committing the sexual assaults, he stole money from the family, and then he just walked out of the home the way he had walked in.
After an extensive investigation, police were no nearer to finding a suspect for the crime.
We tried everything imaginable to try and find this guy, and we were not going to get him.
In May 2002, almost 1 year after the incident, police received information that the DNA from the perpetrator matched a DNA sample from another sexual assault in the area in July 2000.
She woke up to a nude man straddling her. He held a knife to her, threatened to cut her throat. He had tore her shirt up, ripped it up with a knife, used the clothing to blindfold her with and tie her up.
He covered her eyes with tape, and then he proceeded to sexually assault her inside her own home.
He did it violently, he did it aggressively, he did it threateningly, and engaged in the most heinous types of deviant, sexual, forcible, assaultive behavior that one can possibly engage in.
The victim had to unbind herself, and then eventually she called 911 and locked herself in her house. Police arrived, secured the scene, made sure that the suspect was not there, and proceeded to interview the victim and gather as much evidence as they could from the scene.
She did receive a rape kit, and through that kit and all the evidence left at the scene, we did get DNA from the suspect. Once they were linked, we're still trying to find the suspect. We have the DNA, but we had to find something else to try and catch him because we had the DNA, we don't have him yet.
Detectives were now concerned they would not catch the perpetrator before the statute of limitations ran out for the two crimes they'd linked the DNA to.
This is a person where we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that we're able to apprehend this suspect and bring him to justice. So we made a decision in March of 2003 to file an information for the arrest of John Doe based upon multiple crimes that we filed on the DNA profile, naming the DNA profile as the John Doe defendant.
And the purpose for doing that is that it initiates a case inside the statute of limitations so that whenever we do find the name that goes with that man and with his DNA profile, we would just need to amend the information to put the correct name in. It guaranteed that no matter how many decades went by, as long as he was alive when he was found, that we could get justice.
By having the John Doe warrants signed based on a DNA profile, you didn't have to have a name. And then as soon as you were able to match a name to the DNA profile, you could amend it to the actual suspect. So you still have an identified suspect, just not identified by name.
Over the next 10 years, the DNA of the John Doe would be linked to numerous horrifying sexual assaults.
Rock Springs, Clearfield, Laramie, Wyoming, Ogden, Utah, and Layton, Utah.
In all of these, the MO was the same. The suspect would enter quietly in the middle of the night.
We had the way he covered everybody's eyes, the way he bound everybody up, the weapons that he used. Initially, it was knives, and in the end, it was a gun. He progressed throughout these rape cases in violence and duration of time.
He would always try to be there in the middle of the night so that he was waking up victims, standing over them. He would tie victims up with strips of their own clothing. He did not ever seem to bring ropes or things himself. That's very common. And then I think just the calculated coldness while he was doing this, the victims would comment how calculated, how calm he was. And I think that looking back now, it's because he has no empathy.
There were some comments made to one of the victims that kind of stuck out. And for instance, one of the things that he said was, "You have nice titties for a white woman." And the victim believed that he said that to give her the impression that he was some race other than white. But she had been able to see him and knew that it was a white male.
In 2015, investigators were approached by the makers of the TV series Cold Justice.
Their MO is to put a focus on these type of cases, basically to bring to light what's going on, the efforts of law enforcement, and try to, I guess, raise public awareness, to a degree. We've got these victims who have not had justice yet. They haven't had their day in court. In this particular situation, though, strategically, we felt like that this program might benefit the investigation.
What Cold Justice was able to do for us was money. DNA, even just 5 years ago, was a more expensive process than any other crime scene related process would be. And it took time. I mean, there were times in Wyoming when we would send off a DNA sample to the crime lab, and it would literally be years before we got a result because it was not necessarily a priority, or they had to outsource.
Many of the victims, all of the detectives who were still working took part in that. All of the resources that the Clearfield Police Department could put towards it participated in running down leads. It was a massive operation.
The hope was that if this story is done, it's going to trigger memories. It might get more public awareness out there. Maybe we have additional victims come forward. Maybe we obtain additional information and evidence as a result of it. So strategically, the best way to put it, we use it as an investigative technique.
This would link the suspect's DNA to the most shocking crime.
There was a girl who was asleep inside her own home. It was hot, and she was sleeping in the main living area where the couch and the TV would be.
It was so warm that probably about 10, 11 o'clock at night, I was so hot. I moved my blanket down onto the floor, and I moved my pillow onto the floor, and I fell back to sleep because the floor was so much cooler than being on my bed. And the next thing I remember is something woke me up. I wasn't sure what it was. I looked up and I saw an outline of a man against the sliding glass door. And then the person spoke to me, and I didn't recognize the voice and told me to roll onto my stomach. So I did. I did exactly as I was told. I didn't know what to do. As I was there, I heard my parents' bedroom door open, and someone went into the kitchen and opened up the fridge, and I could see the light on, and the person whispered into my ear, "Don't make a sound," and put the knife next to my neck, and I can still feel where that knife was, very smooth against my neck. And part of me was praying that whoever that was would look around the corner, and part of me was hoping that they wouldn't, because I didn't know if this man was going to kill me and then kill them, or what would happen. He put duct tape on my eyes, and he led me through the sliding glass door. He took me across the small parking lot, so I was able to describe exactly where I was and where the car was parked. He pulled out of the apartments, and then as we pulled out of the apartments and he turned left, he pushed me down onto the floor, and he had his hand on my back. He pulled into what was then a park and ride for buses. He told me to get into the back seat of the car, and he began to... It hurt so bad, and I didn't know what he was doing. I was not experienced with sex. I'd never, I was 11 years old. No experience at all. After he was done, he had me get back into the front seat. He drove me home. He parked in front of my apartments, told me to exit the car, and he told me to count to 10 if I thought that I had seen him or his vehicle, him, or if I called the police, he would come back and kill me.
So we realized that we're dealing with one serial rapist and a child rapist. an individual who is sexually assaulting, it appears, victims almost indiscriminate of age.
That is just sadistic. That guy has no conscience whatsoever. He is a true animal.
It is such a change in who I am. I'm not the same person I was.
Investigators would start to pool all of their resources from the different locations to try and catch the suspect.
We put the task force together in 2015 when we were able to get everybody together in the same room and go through everybody else's cases. I knew there were other cases, but I didn't know the details until we got that task force together.
In total, we would have 14 victims in 11 attacks. We had no leads. We had the DNA. We had nothing else to work with. So the idea was to stir the pot again.
The first thing we did was pull every case and find the commonalities in the cases and go through every bit of evidence that we still had. Some evidence had been destroyed from back in the day, but what evidence we still had and what good evidence we had to find any other links that would help us find a suspect.
But because so many of the cases were centralized in the Salt Lake area, we figured that he probably had a home here or some type of a home base. This was where he was centralized. And so we just kept looking for leads in all the cases, hoping that something would pop up that should have been obvious that we just missed.
Clearfield, Utah. Police investigating a savage sexual assault on a local family in 2002 link DNA from the scene to numerous other attacks dating as far back as 1991.
We have 11 victims with DNA matches, but my guess is there's still many more out there that we haven't uncovered.
He may not have specifically targeted me or any of the rest of us, but he was searching for someone and he knew what he was going to do.
In 2015, the crime series Cold Justice air an episode about the crimes that would help investigators in their search.
Our hope was to generate new victims. Not that we wanted new victims, but we wanted new evidence. We wanted new leads, and we hoped if we could find new victims, we would get that information.
For the next 3 or 4 days, hundreds and hundreds of phone calls. It's my brother, it's my dad, it's my uncle, it's my cousin, it's this guy that I used to date.
We went through every single lead and broke them down and listened to rape case after rape case that just would blow your mind.
They got a lot of new leads. They doggedly chased every one of them. Again, no lead led to our suspect.
We thought there was a good possibility that he had died and that we would never know who he was because the cases essentially stopped in 2000. There were no new DNA hits. We also thought there was a possibility that he'd gone to jail or prison for some type of crime, that DNA wasn't collected and sent to the FBI for CODIS hits.
At this time, police were starting to use a new science in building a picture of their suspect.
I knew we had DNA, and you would think as a normal person, as a cop, I thought, gee, we got the DNA. It's going to be out there.
As I indicated back in 2003, my distinct thinking was someday the science will catch up with the evidence. And so don't let the law, the statute of limitations, inhibit that and blow it. We're now aware of some potential availability of some different types of DNA, particularly tracing and tracking. The male Y chromosome is one of the things that was initially done. Now that science is available, let's use it. Let's see where it goes. Let's see what is the result.
Parabon was able to give us an ethnicity, kind of a region to where the suspect had come from. So we had some identifiers there.
So Parabon Nanolabs was able to produce a sketch of how the suspect would have appeared in his 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on, just based off of his DNA.
They said that his eyes would be blue or green, his complexion would be clear. We didn't anticipate him to have freckles. Amazing scientific work that you could tell us that. Still not a lot to go on.
After conducting analysis of the DNA sample, Parabon were able to provide detectives with the name of a potential suspect.
Colleen was able to give us a last name of Byrne. It was the last name I was given, and variations of that name. So of course, as soon as I got that information, I went back through all these leads that we had had and tried to find a last name that would match. And I did get one of a person local, and everything matched, and I did do a warrant on that guy, and turned out not to be the guy. Once again, I thought we had our guy. He looked like the profile, he looked like the picture, and turned out it wasn't him.
It created an increased energy, and it created some thinking and some thought process and some outreach of new and unique ways to look at DNA, possibilities, things that could be done at this point.
Yeah, there was a lot of different stuff that went into it. Nothing that gave us a, this is your guy, but what it also did is ultimately that process went on to Dr. Ventnor.
If we're going to spend this money and do this, we want to make sure that it's scientifically sound to the degree we think it would be admissible in court. So we dotted our I's, crossed our T's, vetted it, and we came to the conclusion that, again, now we've got the science catching up with the evidence. We need to pursue this. No, we were hopeful.
In 2017, police, aware of the advances in DNA science, sent their suspect's DNA to Dr. Barbara Ray Venter, a genetic genealogy consultant who was contracted to help to identify the rapist.
I spent several weeks trying to get a hold of Barbara, and once I did and let her know what was going on, she volunteered to take on the task. I was able to give her the DNA profile fairly quickly, and then I was also able to get her a sample of DNA from one of the victim's cases. She again developed a profile that she was able to use to put into her system to start mining for data.
The difference between what we're asking her to do in 2017 versus what we had been trying to do for 2 decades was it took us from waiting for his DNA to come into the CODIS database to being able to actively hunt him out by looking for and triangulating any relatives who might be in a commercial DNA database.
We were very hopeful because if anything was going to take us in a direction of that DNA profile we filed charges on and sought a warrant on in 2003, this was probably our best hope to date.
It was 2018, Dr. Venter reported back that she had found a man who was likely our suspect's second cousin and that he was living in Ohio. And that was our first active break.
We got the information that she had found a second cousin to the suspect, and we started looking into those leads, and eventually we found out that the mother of the suspect was adopted.
We were then able to petition to the probate court in Ohio to have the adoption and name change unsealed. So once the court granted it in Ohio, what that gave us was a piece of paper from the adoptive parents. That paper included a reference that her biological name was Burns, her last name.
Once we found out who the mother's real name was and were able to get the information, find out who the second cousin, we finally got down to a stepbrother.
Well, they were able to track him down. They got a actual DNA sample from him covertly, sent that off. It turned out it wasn't the guy, but it was a half sibling to our actual known suspect. So they went and they interviewed him, and they found out that he had a half brother by the name of Mark Douglas Burns, and that Mark Douglas Burns had been convicted of rape in North Carolina in the 70s, and that he was currently living still in the Salt Lake area.
Everybody on the team would have been just ecstatic about that, because after 2 decades of nothing and waiting for DNA to hit, this is our first good opportunity to go looking.
It was the only thing that led us to this man. If we would not have had the ability to track him through family members, there's no evidence that I'm aware of that any of the agencies have right now, evidence or information that would have led to him.
Police now begin surveillance of the suspect, Mark Douglas Burns.
The detectives ran his criminal history and found that Mark Burns had been convicted of rape in 1974 in North Carolina. In fact, had been sentenced to death row.
So Mark Burns in 1974 was in the military. He was stationed in North Carolina. The case he was arrested for was a rape inside of a McDonald's bathroom. The victim in that case was an 18-year-old woman.
He was charged and ultimately convicted of rape and sentenced to the death penalty. At that time, North Carolina had the death penalty. He was in prison for a year and a half, and then the North Carolina law changed to where you couldn't put somebody to death for a sexual assault. And so his sentence was commuted to, I believe it was 25 years. And he spent the next 12 or 13 years in a North Carolina prison.
It's a terrible, scary story, and it's worse when you hear about the fact that he A, got out, B, was supposed to die, and C, did it again to so many more people in Utah.
We then learned in about 1987, 1988, that Mark Burns was again convicted of being a peeping Tom, he was caught looking into a window of a woman's apartment.
They don't revoke his parole, and another year later, the same thing. He goes and starts looking in windows. And so he gets arrested again. I think he does about a year and a half in jail, and then he's released in, I believe, late 1989. From then, he moved back to Salt Lake City.
The process of surveilling him led then to a retrieval from trash, from garbage, which is perfectly legal and acceptable in the United States. When a person abandons things in the garbage and they put it out in the trash and wheel it out for public pickup, they no longer have an expectation of privacy in those items.
They got a couple of soda cans and bottles, and they were able to test those and get DNA.
I believe it was September 20th of 2019 when the lab up in Wyoming reported back that the DNA from the garbage we had obtained had a single male profile and that it was our suspect.
On September the 25th, 2019, Mark Douglas Burns is arrested by police.
At that point, Mark Burns was a truck driver who was working out of Brigham City, Utah. He was residing in North Ogden, Utah. And from what it appeared, he was single, living alone, and just working.
Clearfield came up with a plan to make an arrest. So the arrest team basically just decided the easiest way to do it would just be go up to the front door and knock on the door.
Mark?
Yes.
Hey, Detective Swenson. How are you doing?
I'm well. Yourself?
Good. Hey, need you come and talk to me for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. We need to take you up to the office with us, and I had some questions for you. I have another investigator who wants to talk to you.
About what?
I have no idea right now. I'm just an investigator. Asked us, you're swinging by, said, hey, stop by. If Mark is here, pick him up.
He didn't see it coming when they arrested him, and it went down smoothly.
I mean, clearly from the detective standpoint, they're just trying to keep him comfortable. They want him to be a little bit chatty when they bring him in for questioning to talk about the actual case.
Do you have anything on you to be concerned about?
No.
Anything? Come around if I check?
Sure.
The day he was arrested, obviously, we're trying to get all the information we can. And the first thing we do is we go to his house and we start talking to neighbors, people who might have known him. And he had a very good relationship with his next door neighbor. And the things that they were saying, it didn't really seem to fit the type of person you imagine when you think of a serial rapist.
You know, he looked like any guy you'd see on the street. He didn't look like a monster. He just looked like an early 60s man who was being contacted by the police. It was a nice home, middle-class neighborhood, Just looked like a normal Joe.
He didn't seem guarded or anything. He provided information freely, but then as soon as I started talking about the rapes and sexual assaults, he shut down.
Clearfield, Utah, a police investigation of a serious sexual assault had linked the DNA from their crime scene to 9 other incidents dating as far back as 1991.
That is just sadistic. That guy has no conscience whatsoever. He's a true animal.
I don't think you could script a more diabolical, sinister, heinous act of crime perpetrated against humanity and individuals in a family than what our suspect did.
Now in custody, police question Mark Douglas Burns.
Now, will you answer my question, why am I here?
I sure will.
He wants to know, why am I here? What are you asking me these questions for?
Have you ever been convicted of any sex assaults?
I have.
You have?
I have.
Tell me about that.
I was convicted of rape in North Carolina.
Detective Carlson finally told him, we're investigating a rape case. And when he did that, Mr. Burns was visibly upset.
And is that what this is? Is this a rape charge?
Yes.
And he continued talking for a while.
I started to confront him, saying we'd linked DNA to him, and it wasn't just one case, it was multiple cases.
How did you get my DNA?
We got a sample of your DNA.
From North Carolina?
Yes.
Okay. And they were a match?
Yes.
He didn't seem guarded or anything. He provided information freely, but then as soon as I started talking about the rapes and sexual assaults, he shut down.
Would you say that you've raped 10 women? Because I don't think you have.
I have not.
Would you say it's more like 2?
No, I would say at this time I want a lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Burns invoked his right to counsel. Once that's done, we can't ask any more questions. The thing is this, it's DNA. We've had a link on you since 1991. That's my case. That's the first known case where all these cases have come together.
In Wyoming.
Yep, 1991 in Wyoming,
1996 in Wyoming. And the reason I'm here is twofold. A, I have a DNA search warrant to take a DNA sample from you. Okay? And the second part is to talk to you, like Sergeant Robbins explained, that at this point, you got to tell us you want to talk to us if that's something you want to do.
No, I don't.
On the day his trial was to start, Mark Douglas Burns did something police were not expecting.
His attorney came in along the lines and made a pretrial negotiation to us of a potential plea that would have involved 5 counts, him pleading guilty to 5 of the 17. We said, no, that's not going to happen.
We showed up to argue a motion and leaned over to the defense to ask if they were ready, and learned that he had come to court that very day prepared to plead guilty as charged.
And so he goes in and he pled guilty, and he was contrite and calm, and I mean, he took full accountability. He didn't mince words.
I was expecting that we would at least have further hearings, and I was surprised to find out that he decided he's just going to plead guilty. That's all. I'm guilty. We're done. And I'll admit to it.
You got the impression that he was completely in control of the situation. He took control and took accountability for those actions.
Following on from his guilty plea to all counts of sexual assault, Burns also pleads guilty to 3 murders.
In addition to those rape charges that he's already facing and wants to plead guilty to, he's now confessing to homicides. 1 of them in Utah, 1 of them in Arizona, and 1 of them in Oregon.
How can anybody do this to another human being? How depraved? How does a person get to the point where they can conduct themselves in such a dastardly manner and ruin other people's lives in significant ways. But experiencing Mark Burns in the courtroom, personally standing just feet away from me, I felt it. You could see, okay, this is a guy who would do it. Just the way he spoke, the way he talked, the way he carried himself, the way he addressed with his attorney, the way he talked to the judge. There was nothing genuine about him. There was nothing sincere. There was nothing contrite. It was a game to Mark Burns.
Burns offers to do an exclusive interview with the local news channel.
This is a guy who has an ego. He's proud of what he did. He thinks that he's going to be famous because of this case. And as sad and as sick as that is, there are people out there who want to be famous for their crimes.
Now, the problem that the defense attorney had with this case, and any good defense attorney would, is Mark Burns didn't listen to his defense attorney. He didn't shut up.
If this defense attorney, is a good defense attorney, I'm sure she told her client, you are not to do any interviews with the media. You're not to do any interviews with the police without me being there. You keep your mouth shut and you let me do my job. He wasn't listening to his defense attorney.
But at the end of the day, Mark Burns's zeal and drive for notoriety undermined the credibility of any real factual substantive defense his attorney could have presented at trial. He would have been convicted.
Finally, the victims of Mark Douglas Burns can get the justice they deserve.
The one thing about a plea agreement like this is the victims who don't want to be public don't have to be. The opposite of that is you've got people like our 11-year-old who want to talk to him, who want to face him. And, we don't talk enough about victims' rights as opposed to suspects' rights.
One of his last acts before the judge sent him to prison for the rest of his life was to attempt to silence that 11-year-old girl who is now a grown woman and wanted to address the court. How can you do that and also claim that you have remorse or that you feel sorry for her?
He's not saying what he did, he's just saying that he did it. I mean, I would love to have him explain, okay, explain to me what was going through your mind when you put duct tape over this girl's eyes and told her to roll over because you were going to rape her anally.
I said, I want you to remember that you told me not to bother to tell anyone, that you would never be caught. I did it anyway because I'm stronger than you. It may have taken 28 years, but we are here today. You were wrong, and Detective Peterson was right. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when.
Mark Douglas Burns is sentenced for his crimes.
The judge sentenced him to the maximum, 16 to life on the 14 counts where he could, and 6 years to life on the other 3 counts, and ran them all consecutive.
I think he is starting to come to terms with the fact that he's not going to get what he wants. He's going to have to go to a state prison, and he's going to have to sit there for a long time and think about what he did.
And I hope it eats at him. I hope it eats at him every day, because it eats at me. And it eats at every one of the survivors.
He expressed some very shallow remorse to the victims. One single tear, and then the minute he was done, he was cold again.
He likes what he did. Mark Burns is he's proud of himself. He's pleased with himself. He wants notoriety. He wants infamy. Mark Burns wants to be remembered. That is somebody that is beyond rehabilitation.
The horrifying crimes committed by Mark Douglas Burns would have gone unpunished were it not for the advances in modern science and familial DNA.
Being able to use DNA genealogy databases to narrow it down, we couldn't have done it. This was the one, the straw that broke the camel's back. This was the thing that got us there, and we couldn't have done it without it.
If we did not have the genetic genealogy on this case, he would still be living in our community. We would have no justice. I don't see any other way that we could have found him.
Technology changes so much, so fast. Law enforcement is always 2 or 3 steps behind. If you really want sex crimes solved, give us enough money to make sure that all of these DNA test kits are being processed. Give us enough money for the equipment that can lead us to finding that one piece of evidence that we may be overlooking. Those are important things.
At the end of the trial, I really did put it away. I told my husband that I was going to watch and see what happened with the Wyoming cases, and to be very honest, I haven't checked once. I just haven't thought about it. It's completely, I need to live my life.